And I'm delighted to have with me my fellow judge, Melissa Lucashenko, the winner of the prize, Emily Bitto, and of course also with me, I'm having a complete blank moment, which is really just shows what a late night it was last night, Sofie Laguna. Please would you join me in welcoming them all. Now, I just wanted to mention some of the sort of prizes that this illustrious trio have won between them or are up for, because there are still some prizes in contention, as we know. So Sofie is longlisted for the Miles Franklin for The Eye of the Sheep. Emily is longlisted for the Dobby Prize, so there's still a little bit of suspense in the air. And Melissa is a winner in her own right many times over. She won the Queensland Deloitte Literary Award for Mullumbimby, her novel, which also won the Victorian Premier's Indigenous Writing Award, was shortlisted for the Kibble, longlisted for the Stella, longlisted for the Miles Franklin, and longlisted for the Dublin Impact Prize. She was also a winner of the Dobby Award for Steam Pigs, and she's also won a Walkley Award for long-form writing in 2013 for a piece about poverty in Brisbane and Logan. So she is eminently qualified to talk about the experience of winning, and so that's where I thought I would kick off our conversation tonight, Melissa. I thought I'd love to kind of keep this conversation as real and honest as possible. What does winning really mean, apart from the kind of glory and the validation, which is a kind of a given? What did winning mean for you?
Well, I've won those different prizes at different times, but, you know, money means something, and it's not an insignificant thing, you know, to win $20,000 for the Victorian Premier's Prize for Indigenous Writing. That's, you know, I live very frugally. You know, I live a very modest life, which suits me, luckily. But that'll keep me going for a year, that money, pretty much. And the Queensland Deloitte Prize for Fiction was actually a community prize under the previous Labor governments. That had been a $50,000 prize, and then Campbell Newman got into power, and his first acts in Parliament were to defund services to gay and lesbian health service, to basically attack the funding of a prisoner service that I was instrumental in setting up, and to completely slash the funding for the Premier's Awards for Literature. So I was feeling a bit personally targeted in that first week. And the community rallied around, got $5,000 together with the kind help of Deloitte, but Campbell Newman personally cost me $45,000.
Yes, but maybe you will also personally cost him the premiership.
I made a significant donation to someone who was not standing for the LNP in the last election, and I enrolled in his electorate so that I could vote against him. But in the broader sense, the money is really important. You know, you can't write on your laptop when your bills aren't paid, and the stress that engenders. It's not just the fact of having no electricity, but the stress of having to constantly think about money for bills, of course, money for food, money for petrol. But also, I think even as valuable probably is the affirmation that what you're doing is important, and it's of a standard that other people, it's respect. I think writers, particularly writers of fiction, you have to be sitting right on a cusp between egomaniac in order to actually think anyone wants to read your work, and that it's important. And yes, of course, I should spend 5 years in a room with nobody else except my own raving head. And then on the other side of the cusp, there's all the self-doubt, there's all the writer's block, there's all the horror of being a writer. And you need to sit on a very narrow margin between those two things. And prizes is one way of tipping yourself towards the confidence to keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that very fine line that you described is absolutely, it's fraught with all sorts of complexities, and we might revisit some of that a little bit later in this conversation. So, Emily, what does winning, I know it hasn't really quite sunk in yet. You've done 12 media interviews today and you're feeling a little bit battered by the experience.
Lucky 13.
What does winning mean to you in terms of what you're going to be able to do because you've won this prize?
I mean, I think just all of the things that Melissa mentioned. Obviously, the money means writing time, and that's just a huge gift, you know. I mean, as I've been talking about a lot today, I started a bar 5 months ago with my partner.
Your bar is getting a lot of traction in the media.
Does it have a name, this bar?
Oh,
is it conveniently close by?
Yeah, bar promo, may as well throw that in. Yeah, but that was sort of basically my plan to try and build a long-term sort of sustainable way of earning a living, and yet having the kind of flexibility of time to write. Because that's the thing, if you take a full-time job, it's just, I've seen it.
But also you were very clever and very strategic in taking a job which doesn't require the same part of your brain that writing does. And I think one of the things that people often do mistakenly is take work, say as a journalist, for example, which you are led to believe by some writers who can cross over, very few, that one will nurture the other. My experience is that does not happen. Yeah. You chose to do some work which would not occupy your brain.
Yeah, and I think, I was doing a lot of...
Let me rephrase that. Once people wanted to be barristers, now they want to be baristas, and there is a reason for that.
Yeah. And I mean, I was doing teaching mainly before starting the bar, and that was definitely, I love teaching and I actually miss it, but I found it completely all-consuming mentally, and I was spending all day talking about writing, talking about thinking about writing in a very sort of analytical way, reading other people's work, and I just found at the end of the day the last thing I wanted to do was write. I do love teaching, but I think I just needed to kind of prioritise writing, and that was,
The Native American writer Sherman Alexie says that you're not actually an Indian unless you've, at some point in your life, wished that you weren't. And I think it's almost the same thing for writers. You're not actually in the sisterhood of writers or the brotherhood of writers until you've come to the realisation that it was all a terrible mistake. And I wish I could go and work in Woolies.
Well, I agree with nearly everything that Sherman Alexie says. He's a great person to quote. So, Sofie, tell us a little bit about the kind of writing ecology that you've created to make a sort of sustainable career as a writer. You've kind of gone from being an actor and a performer to being a writer. How did you manage that?
So I have been writing for children since 2002, I suppose. I published my first picture book, and then there were several picture books to follow, then chapter books, then novels for children. And when you write for children, it means that you can also work in schools. I integrated my performance experience, so I would perform my picture book texts as one-woman shows. I would bring props, dog ears, blankets.
Did you bring them tonight? Please say yes.
So I used to do the My Yellow Blankie show. Right. That's been done all over Australia. Not tonight. And so that's how it's been. And then in 2008, I wrote my first adult novel, and then I moved back into writing for children. So I'm sort of moving around, I suppose.
So that's the name of the game for you, is flexibility, versatility, that kind of multi-skilling.
I'm not conscious of any of it, though. It's not any conscious decision about I'm not business-minded. I'm just following whatever creative or whatever, passion is there. I'm following my heart, I suppose. Yeah, I'm following the creative desire. And
so, talking about the kind of stress that Melissa was talking about and that kind of anxiety about bill paying, do you identify with that? Are you someone who does worry about how sustainable a writing life is?
Gosh, I feel bad for saying it's not high on my list of concerns.
No, that's
I'm
great.
just fully immersed in the stories, and then in what school booking I have, and will there be enough for this year? But it's not high on my list. It never has been. I mean, okay, I was an actor for many years.
So you've lived with uncertainty.
So boy, oh boy, I mean, it makes the writing life look like a breeze. At least, when you would turn up to auditions, there would be absolutely no feedback, and you'd walk out the door and you would hear nothing and have all your hopes sort of crushed. The writing life is, gosh, it's fantastic compared to that. I mean, at least you get a letter if it doesn't want your book. So, and also you can write whenever you want. You don't need casts or directors or stages. You can be as busy as you like. And when you're waiting for feedback on one thing, you can be immersed in other things. And that's how it is for me more. Yeah.
You make it sound great.
It is great. It is great. It's a privilege, isn't it?
It is. It is
We're
a
in a
privilege.
country where we can write and make money from it, and we're women. It
theory.
is great. It is great.
Emily, you said some very interesting things last night about how the novel dovetails with your work on your PhD on women's creative opportunities. And I was just wondering whether you could reprise some of the things that you said last night for this audience, because I think they'd find them really interesting.
Yeah, sure. So the Strays basically was kind of half of a creative writing PhD that I finished at Melbourne Uni in 2013, and the other half of it was a research project, and in that research I was looking at representations of the figure of the artist in a sort of broad sense, whether it's writers or visual artists or any kind of creative producers, and the way that this sort of, I guess, a particular myth of creativity and what it means to be an artist has kind of become quite dominant in our culture. And I think that comes down predominantly from Romanticism, and it's what I kind of found in that research is that there's an incredible kind of gender bias in that myth of the artist. Women kind of historically have been excluded from being thought of as genius artists and all of those sorts of things, the troubled genius and the inborn natural genius, all of those kind of stereotypes. And when women did kind of obtain any sort of success, they often either were kind of referred to as kind of dabblers and hobbyists, or kind of their femininity was seen to be lost through this kind of act of becoming an artist. And there's all sorts of horrendous quotes that particularly from sort of 19th century texts that talk about this, about how women artists are sort of surrogate men, and it's really fascinating and horrifying. And
there was one quote that you quoted last night which was much more recent than the 19th century.
Yeah, it was
76, wasn't it?
Yeah, 62, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What was the quote?
It was, see if I can remember, it was from Reg Butler, who was a sculptor and academic, and it was something like, can a woman become a vital creative artist without ceasing to be a woman except for the purposes of a census?
In 1962.
Yeah.
And the answer is...
Of course not.
Sophia, I wanted to ask you a little bit about how you achieved the remarkable voice of Billy in The Eye of the Sheep, because it struck me that maybe the way you sustain that voice as beautifully as you do does owe something to your background in performance. And I wondered whether, in making that voice so strong and so believable, you had read your own work to yourself aloud, whether you performed the work as part of the process of writing it.
I once heard writing described as a kind of inner performance. So in that way, I can, it parallels an acting life. So it's an inner performance, and that's how it must resonate with me, because that's how I feel it. I do read all my work aloud, but it's largely an unconscious process. I feel quite relaxed when I'm in his voice. It's a very loose sort of way to write. He thinks in such wild and uncontained and original ways, so that's a really relaxing exploration.
Because he's such a kind of free-range mind. He goes everywhere.
I feel like I'm cheating because he's a very young voice and he doesn't know a lot. There's a lot of research that one doesn't have to necessarily do. One just has to. It's a different task. It's a different. My job is a different one, or my. The things that this character asks from me is different to that. It's.
Well, you have to maintain a certain kind of innocence, a certain kind of naivety about the way he sees the world.
But at the same time, he's quite sharp, isn't he? So he's really reflecting the adult world in quite sharp, well-articulated ways.
Would you like to give us a little taste of Billy?
Yes.
Would you like to perform a little bit of Billy?
Jimmy, I should say, Carol.
Jimmy, sorry.
That's all right.
Judge overload, sorry.
I hope it's okay. I said, it's okay. Part 1. It was Saturday morning and I was doing the gardening with Mum. My dad was still asleep. "When will he wake up, Mum? Mum, when will Dad wake up?" I asked as she watered the fern, its tentacles bouncing under the pressure. If I stood close enough, I could hear the same tentacles inside my mum, waving at the dust in her air ducts. "Has he had enough, Mum, yet? Does he still need more rest?" My dad worked at the mobile refinery in Altona, getting rid of the rust. Rust came back every time it rained, but even if it left my dad raw, his skin corroded so you could see the fibres that joined him. He didn't stop scraping. He learned how at the Western Car Yard in Laverton. Mum said all the Flick brothers knew how to work. "You help me in the garden, love, and let Dad have a bit of rest. He'll be tired after the night shift. Here, take the hose." Mum passed me the hose, and I felt the water pushing its way through the rubber tube. The hose gave it a direction. I aimed it at the leaves, and then I aimed at the path, blasting leaves against the edges.
Now, the field of writing books in the voice of children who are somewhere on the autism, Asperger's spectrum is very crowded. Just before I came this evening, one of the few things I seem to have done as an adequate piece of research is that I looked at the list of published books in that genre, and there are 116 titles in that field.
Gosh.
How did you carve out a niche for yourself in this very, very overcrowded genre, which, after all, 20 years ago did not exist?
Except for the Bone people.
That was
very,
incredible.
Very early. And funnily enough, on one of the lists that I looked at this evening before coming here, someone included To Kill a Mockingbird, which I thought was an extraordinary inclusion.
Are we talking about Boo Radley or?
Yeah. So I was just obviously before you're right about the Bone people, but I suppose the starting point for many people's awareness of this would be The Curious Incident of the Dog.
Yeah.
But did you think about that at all, or did you try and forget about all of that?
I'm concerned that none of my answers are going to sound smart enough or something, because no, they're not, because it was really unconscious. It was unconscious. I came up with the idea for this boy 12 years ago. I met him as an adult. I always knew I wanted to investigate his childhood. I didn't even think that he was necessarily autistic. I identified with him when I was writing him. I don't write him with labels in mind at all. Who knows if he truly is? We're so, at the moment, the way, and maybe the pendulum has swung in a certain direction. So we need labels, and we're investigating autism and Asperger's. But he is not a set of symptoms. He's absolutely himself. And there are all sorts of people that might fit into, might have that sort of label. He's I think he's quite gifted. He's unique. He's poetic. He's manic. Yes, he's anxious. I use my own anxiety. I probably, without being conscious of it, am using dog in the nighttime or other things I've read and learned. But it's like we're bowerbirds collecting all bits, and they all sit at the back there. We're not really conscious of it, and then we relax and sit in the chair, and out comes the character. That's how it feels. So I'm using all sorts of things that I'm not conscious of at the time. And then later people ask me about Asperger's and autism. What do I know, really?
Well, no, it's interesting because this is obviously
it's all
also
instinct. It's instinct.
the way Graham Simpson, to some extent,
I heard him
also
describe it. I heard him.
talks
I went,
about the
oh,
Rosie
God,
Project.
If only I could have used his sentences, because he put it so well. That's sort of what I mean.
Yeah, no.
He's really, he's so fun in the way he thinks, this character, Jimmy. I enjoyed him immensely. And obviously the reading that, or watching a current affair or the news, or we're all learning about autism must be also feeding the character. The way I've understood that children with autism repeat themselves, have a disconnect when it comes to the emotions. But there must be so many things in between those typical ways of behaving.
There's no typical
there is no
presentation.
typical.
My son has Asperger's, and people with autism can be brilliant, or they can be of average intelligence or below average. There's a huge range of and it's almost impossible to categorise.
Because aren't we all with a stroke of this and some of that? And
we are, but at the same time, if you are, severely on the spectrum,
Yeah.
it makes a huge difference in your life, and it's not something that can be brushed aside. It's a big deal.
I'm sure you are right, and it's not my, I never even labelled him as anything.
No,
I
but
don't know if he's anything. I was just with him.
That, I think, is what gives the writing its freshness, is you don't feel that there's a formula here where you're sort of giving us a diagnosis.
No way, I'm not equipped to do anything
No.
like that. And the mother never did either.
No.
The doctor said you should go. She said he's just who he is. And
Well, she loves him for his individuality, for his very singular perspective. Emily, talking of singular perspectives, I, as an only child, was particularly pleased that the central character in The Strays is an only child, and an only child where you've managed in the characterisation to avoid the cliches of only children. But at the same time, you do emphasise the fact that this is someone with a singularly mature perspective for her age, and who is, like a lot of only children, something of an outsider, fascinated by the dynamics of messier, louder, bigger families. Can you talk a little bit about your only child and why you were interested in writing an only child?
I essentially grew up as an only child. I have a half-brother and sister who are younger than me, who lived in Melbourne. I lived in Queensland. And so I guess that's probably the most sort of personal aspect of this novel. It's definitely not sort of autobiographical in any literal sense, but I definitely drew on that feeling, and I think partly because I wanted to write, I knew I wanted to write an outsider novel, partly because a lot of the novels that I love have that sort of aspect to them, and I think it's an interesting kind of dynamic.
Like what are you thinking of amongst your favourites?
I guess things like Donna Tartt's The Secret History, or Alan Hollinghurst's Line of Beauty, or Brideshead Revisited, things where there's sort of someone who's kind of an observer, participant. It's just an interesting kind of perspective, I think.
It's interesting, the books you've mentioned there, they're also quite fascinated by the sort of glamour of a tribe, aren't they?
Is The Secret History the Irish novel? Is that what you're talking
No,
about?
it's
the university novel
university
that Donna
novel.
Tartt wrote about the sort of classics students, and there's a murder amongst the students.
Okay, no, don't know.
Yeah, it's one of my favourites, and it kind of has this character who, comes from quite a different background, and he falls in. I think he gets a scholarship to this very privileged sort of university, and there's this group of students that are all very privileged, and
Ivy League.
Absolutely wants to be part of that, but sort of isn't, and and I think it's just, I just find that a really fascinating kind of perspective, and one that's quite it has a lot of possibilities, because especially if it's a first person narrator, they have the narrator is kind of a character in the story. They have all of their own kind of complicated motivations going on, and the way that they observe the other characters is tinged with all of their own issues. And I guess knowing that I wanted to sort of write this outsider novel, the natural thing to draw on for me was that experience of being an only child, and that's the way that, that's what's kind of given me that perspective, I guess.
Would you like to give us a little taste then of The
Sure.
Strays?
So I'm just going to read the very start. I once read that the heart's magnetic field radiates up to 5 metres from the body, so that whenever we are within this range of another person, our hearts are interacting. The body's silent communications with other bodies are unmapped and mysterious, a linguistics of scent, colour, flushes of heat, the dilating of a pupil. Who knows, what we call instant attraction may be as random as the momentary synchrony of 2 hearts' magnetic pulses. Eva's mother believed in past life connections, that 2 souls can be twinned over and over, playing out different roles, so that in one life they may be mother and daughter, in another husband and wife, in a third dear friends. I only know that throughout my life I have felt an instinctive attraction to particular people, male and female, romantic and platonic, attraction inexplicable at the time, but for a certain mutual recognition. It was this way with Eva, although we were only 8 years old. I remember that day after it all fell apart, when Eva came to me through the misty garden, so that her red coat blared into view from white to pale rose to scarlet. The pride I felt, that I was the one she turned to, that I could give her what her own family could not. All those years as part of the Trenthams' lives, feeling loved but never needed, never family. I am an only child. It is my lot to be envious, even grasping, to long for the bonds that tie sisters together, the fearless, unthinking acceptance that we are social creatures, pack animals, that there is never truly the threat of being alone.
So I'm intrigued, Emily, that in a way, just as Sofie kind of took on, not consciously, a very overcrowded genre in terms of Jimmy's condition, let's call it that just loosely, the terrain of Heidi has been visited and revisited many, many times. How did you find the faith in yourself to think, I can find a new way of taking the material of the goings-on and shenanigans of the Reeds and do something else with it? And can you just talk a little bit about the sort of alchemy then of taking the research, of absorbing all of that and then putting it aside?
Yeah, I mean, it was a sort of tricky negotiation, and probably I just sort of thought to myself, this is a PhD project. It's never going to actually be a published novel. I can do whatever I like. Yeah, I think I did do a lot of reading about the Heidi Circle, and, you know, I was kind of toing and froing about how much I wanted to draw on the literal sort of stories of that group of people, and in the end I decided to very much avoid the actual kind of real life events that happened there and the characters themselves, and to just sort of use it as a jumping off point, I guess, partly because what went on there was just so incredibly dramatic that I think it would have been too much to fictionalise. But yeah, I think I just didn't think about how it would be. I couldn't sort of think about how it would be judged or received. It was just something that fascinated me and that I was doing kind of for its own sake, I guess.
Melissa, just listening to those 2 pieces of reading takes me back to the sheer hell of judging this prize.
I'd love to know what that was
and
like.
how difficult it was. And I was just wondering, we can't talk about the deliberations, which are absolutely confidential.
Only if everyone in the room promises not to tell.
What was it like?
Well, I'm going to ask Melissa that question. I'm going to ask you whether there's anything that you would like to share with us about the process. And you have judged other awards, and maybe there's something comparative that you'd like to say, or anyway, something about the experience.
All the other book awards I've judged have been Aboriginal awards, so the dynamic in the room is quite different, and
Different how?
Oh gosh, you're looking at a much smaller writing pool for a start, and you're looking at you've got to balance things like the literacy of the audience that the books have been written for, the literacy of the writers themselves, what material they're dealing with. It's quite a different ball game, really.
So did you find this easy? While I was struggling with this, did you find this easy?
No, I certainly didn't find it easy. And the volume was difficult, of course. I said I'd be a judge, and then a little bit later down the track got an email saying, clear out 3 linear metres of your bookshelf for the Stella entrance, and my jaw sort of hit the ground and didn't come up again for about a week. So yeah, it's a huge job. It's an overwhelming job. The flip side of that is that you get to read an enormous amount of women's fiction and non-fiction that you wouldn't otherwise
Absolutely.
get to touch.
That was the great pleasure of it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't work in schools. I don't do much except write, and so I buy maybe 5 or 6 new books a year. That's what I'm limited to. The rest of it, it's libraries and hitting old ladies on the head and stealing their books that look interesting on the train. Not really. So to have, was it 200 or 300 books, a couple of hundred books at least, arrive in big boxes. It's like, oh my God, I've got to read all these books, but oh my God, I've got all these new books.
Yeah. There was a real delight in discovering books, which, I have to say in my job at Booktopia, I think that I see pretty well everything. And so many books that came in for the Stella were books that were under my radar, and that really alarmed me. It made me think, how do these books stand a chance in the market? I'm supposed to have seen them and championed them, and I missed them. And I want to be very candid now with you, Sofie, about something, because your book was a book that I discovered that way. I had not come across your book before, and I should have. And I feel that your book did not get the critical attention that it deserved when it was published.
Yeah,
and I
absolutely second that.
Really?
Absolutely.
I wonder whether you think that that's because you've been pigeonholed as a writer of children's fiction primarily and young adult fiction. I know you've written an adult fiction book, I know, but I do think that there are all sorts of hidden stigma that operate in the literary community, and I just cannot understand how a book of the quality of The Eye of the Sheep could have failed to have got more serious critical reviews.
Well, gosh, I thought it was reviewed in the, Louise Swing gave it a huge review, and was it the Sydney Morning Herald with Susan Bugg, or that wasn't the Sydney Morning Herald, but was the Herald.
So you didn't.
I've got a very small baby. I'll have to excuse any babble. No, I mean I got so many. So there was the Australian. Eventually, The Age gave me a huge review. There was the Weekend magazine of. Oh God, I can't remember, but there's been. So
you
the
didn't
big ones
feel like that.
I've had a new baby at the same time, so I have limited energy for. Worrying about the stuff outside of it, and so much is going on. So I've had thrilling reviews that I couldn't be anything but pleased with. I understand that, I have been a children's author, and so I have, and I know about that pigeonholing, can make it very difficult, and there aren't that many who have crossed. But I feel somehow that I seem to be swimming, it seems to be okay.
Well, I'm relieved to hear that.
One Foot Wrong was published all over the world. It was Longlisted for the Miles, and that was the first one. It was a novella. It was incredibly confronting, very dark. It had a very unassuming, mysterious sort of cover. And film rights have been. How much can I ask for? Okay. And so yes, I'm new to this game, and this book has come out, and it's going to have to sneak and push. And here we are having this conversation. We've been shortlisted for the Stella. We're longlisted, and fingers crossed for the Miles. I have yeah,
Okay,
how much
so you're
more?
happy. No, that's
No,
fine.
but you're probably right, Caroline, and there should be a whole lot of other stuff. Damn it.
If you're happy.
No, I understand there have been... No, Caroline, you are also correct. I have been... But many books, one man's long list is another man's boring, isn't it? It's true, though. It's true, you know.
It is.
Certain wonderful pieces of work are overlooked, and we gasp, and how did this happen? And it's the nature of literary fiction or literary non-fiction. It's a difficult, unfair world. And some people right now will be really angry that their book didn't go further in the Stella, that other people would consider absolutely wonderful. It's building and building. I'm grateful for the bits that are... They're not bits.
They're not bits.
Yeah. So yes, I would have loved to have been... There are other shortlists that I ought to have been on. There you go. But there are other people who can say, but I'm not on the miles this year.
Yeah, well, I mean, Emily, that's one of the things that was very striking.
It's not a fair... And also it's all run by human beings.
Yes.
And also...
It's not an algorithm.
And also celebrity or being well-known engenders being more well-known, and it's confronting for people to take on new stuff. It asks for more commitment from a reader. We're all more comfortable with someone we know has already proved that, and we read them over and over again. That's what we're like as people, isn't it? That's what humans are like. We're a bit like sheepish.
That's what
Oh, God,
The
no,
eye
the
of
eye
the
of the sheep. And guess what? It is the year of the sheep. But eventually sort of quality or something else will push its way through, and a certain set of judges or people will come together and write stuff, or certain stuff happen. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. Melissa.
And you're right, it's so individual. Any of the books on the short list could easily have won, and arguably any of the books on the long list could easily have won. And one of the things that I'm proud of with our shortlist, Caroline, is that I think we did a pretty good job of not over-inflating the importance of name writers.
Because it's highly political, is it? I mean, hard not to be.
Well, we tried not to be political.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that is something that you park that outside the room.
Yeah.
You try not to bring your agendas into the room if you have any.
Yeah, and
But I agree.
There were a number of huge names that didn't make it onto the short list, let alone win. And I think that's to our credit as judges that we...
And that's a challenging thing to do, isn't it? I mean, it asks for some sort of energy from you in a way.
Yes, one of those decisions that people call courageous.
Minister.
Not necessarily going to be loved for it.
No, you do not do these things to be loved.
Yeah.
Emily, you said some very thoughtful, very carefully considered things last night about a decision that you made that followed in what now feels like a kind of Stella tradition in a sense, which is this whole business of donating some of your prize money. And again, I was wondering whether you could revisit some of your thinking that led to the decision you made last night for this audience who may not have been there.
Yeah, sure. So you probably all know that Carrie Tiffany, the first Stella Prize winner, donated some of her winnings to the shortlist, which was not necessarily in the second year because there was already sort of a prize money for the shortlist, but Claire Wright very generously donated some of her winnings as well. And so, as I said last night, I felt I was in quite a kind of interesting position as the third winner because, if I continued that, I felt it would really cement that tradition. And, I didn't want to kind of create going forward this sort of sense of an oppressive kind of obligation, in a situation where it's all supposed to be about relieving pressures on women, and for women to kind of feel like, oh, this is a $50,000 prize, but it's actually just a $45,000 because I have to give away $5,000 because that's what you do, kind of thing.
There's that 45,000 figure again.
Damn Campbell Newman.
Not that I'm bitter.
So I guess I just wanted to raise that in my speech, and I sort of thought about it a lot, and I I wrote like a draft of the speech where I actually said I was going to be the selfish third winner and not donate anything. And then I kind of thought, well, at the same time, I don't want to just do that for the sake of the future winners that, you know, I actually want to do what I want to do for myself as well. And so in the end, I kind of just said I would like to donate a portion of my winnings to the Wilderness Society.
And I think the fact that you said it that way and that you were very discreet in not nominating a sum was a very well considered, very well judged decision, because that really is no one's business. The gesture is a lovely one, but you don't need to tell us how much. But it's a very, very personal, very individual thing, and I think it was really great to articulate the sort of conflict that you experienced about what to do.
And I think it's interesting, you know, that the Stella Prize as well, you know, it's for women, and there's so much kind of association between giving and being a woman, and you know, it's something that, I mean, I think it's something that's coming into a lot of awards now as well, but I think it's something that's kind of become associated with the Stella Prize, and I just, you know, I don't want to perpetuate that association.
We've got about 15 minutes left, and I'm sure you are bristling with questions for Melissa, Sofie or Emily, so there are some microphones, and if you put up your hand, the microphone will come to you. So now's your chance.
While we wait,
Yeah.
can I just ask a process question? Did both of you or either of you know from very young that you were going to be writers? Or did it come later in life for you? Well, later in life, you're both 12.
Well, I reread. No, it's funny.
Here comes the finger.
Melissa, it's funny you should say that, because I reread the diary I wrote when I was 12, and it said I want to be a poet or a movie director.
Ah, there you go.
So I'm sort of, you know, hovering around poet and movie director. Yeah.
And I can't really remember if I specifically kind of enunciated that I wanted to be a writer, but I was always writing. You know, I've got heaps of little books that I wrote when I was a kid, stapled, and, you know, stories that I just was constantly maybe zine maker.
What about you, Melissa? Did you know from an early age?
No, I comically now wanted to be a jockey. Horse mad.
I wanted to be a stunt water skier.
Oh, really? Oh, that's cool. It's never too late.
I think it might be.
But as I was a bookish kid and did well in English at school. Education was really emphasised in my family as a. You know, my mum, I've told this story before, but my mum had to leave school in year 3, and she always said it was because her family she couldn't afford clothes. She used to wear cast-off adults' dresses or a dress, and this is Depression years. And there was no money for children's clothing, and she always said that's why she didn't go to school, but it was also the case that Aboriginal kids in Queensland weren't allowed to go to school after about year 4 at that time, except very exceptionally. And my mum sort of fitted into a kind of category of sort of half-caste, quarter-caste, people who may or may not have been Aboriginal, depending on whether it was convenient to think of them that way. So anyway, the short version is Mum didn't get to go to school, and she really, really wanted her kids to go to school. My youngest brother, who's 4 years older than me, was the first in the family to finish high school. And a bookish kid, but that quote by George Orwell where he says, until the age of 30, I knew that I had to be a writer, but I was completely convinced that I was going to be an absolute and utter failure at it. That was my feeling. When I read that, I thought, yes, that's me. Yeah. But I was published well before 30, as it turns out.
Do we have a question from the audience? Yes.
This is a question for Emily. I was wondering, Emily, when you realised that The Strays was going to stand on its own as a book on its own, or were you prompted externally?
Probably before I'd even sort of finished the PhD, I was probably prompted, I actually can't remember now, but I entered the manuscript in the Victorian Premier's Prize for an unpublished manuscript and got shortlisted for that. And that was kind of the point where I kind of went, oh, this could actually happen. Yeah. That was definitely a huge sort of turning point. Yeah.
Another question? Just while we're waiting for another question from the audience, one of the things that you do so well, Sofie, is that you pile quite a lot into Jimmy's life. He's got a lot to deal with. So he's got a father who's alcoholic and violent, and so you're not just dealing with his own sort of very unusual perspective on life or way of seeing life, but he's got some very, very tough problems to deal with. And you avoid sentiment, you avoid melodrama, and there's a kind of charming lightness and humour to the book, which gives it a lot of breathing room. I was just wondering, Melissa, whether there was something that you could talk about there about the way you can use humour as a sort of a relief valve when you're discussing things that are heavy and serious, because you do that in Mullumbimby.
Yeah, and I knew that it was both conscious and unconscious. I knew that no one wants to read about misery. I don't want to read about misery. But if you want to, it's kind of the train spotting thing or the Irvin Welsh thing. You can write about quite difficult subjects if you throw yourself in with great energy and people get to laugh at the same time. And it's also just a reflection of life, you know, in the underclass or in the Aboriginal world. It's a very, very funny existence, you know, despite what's going on. I think the people with very little to lose are the funniest people that I've ever met. And that's what I try and convey sometimes in my work.
On the sort of flip side of the humour, in terms of emotional intensity, I don't want to give too much away because there will be people in the room who haven't read the book, but there is a scene in the book that did make me... I had to put the book down and then I burst into tears, and that really happens very rarely. When you write a scene which has that kind of emotional intensity, are you crying? Do you move yourself?
I have to say I do move myself. I do. I do.
That's okay.
No, yeah, I think about him, and yeah, I feel such compassion and love for him, and he made me weep all the time. I really feared for him. I cared for him, and I wept for him at his losses, through the scenes, after the scenes, at night, lying in bed. No.
You must have been hell to live with.
No, because I think I just... yeah, he's funny and he's lovable and he's alive, and I knew where I was heading. You know, I knew I had a destination, and he fills me with love, and I'm so proud of him, and so that saves me. I knew he had to. Of course, I don't want to give anything away.
No,
but I had to hold on, and yeah. But yeah, no, I can still think about him now and feel.
Don't cry
I won't
now.
cry,
Don't cry.
But I think about him with great pride and affection.
Good.
We should probably mention too that he doesn't stay 6 in the book. You know, there's about the age jumps.
Jumps up to 11.
Yeah, and then 17 or 18?
No, in my memory, gosh, no, I think he stays there.
Oh, okay.
No, just 11.
Sorry to pitch on the right.
You've read 200 books.
Yeah,
I
we
have
have.
read 200 books.
There's a question here.
Hi, this is a question for Emily. Congratulations on the book and on the winning, and it's just such a lovely piece. I just wanted to know that, like, from now on, you've gotten the award, and of course that's going to help with your writing life and all. But do you think that creates pressure for your next novel, and how do you hope to get around that?
Thanks for reminding me of that. I mean, I guess I felt pressure around the second novel as soon as the first one was finished, partly, you know, just literally having pressure from my publisher and agent saying, all right, have you started the next one yet? I think actually, in a strange way, the bar is going to be my saving grace in that way, because it's, you know, I'm so busy with that at the moment that I'm just absolutely longing to get back to writing.
It's
and,
funny because when you said the bar, I thought she's raised the bar. I didn't understand about that bar.
the actual bar.
I thought you said bath. I was going, what?
My life as a barmaid.
Okay, don't knock it. I've been there.
Yeah, I mean, it's great fun. But it's just, you know, because I've basically been working 80-hour weeks for the last 5 months. I haven't had any time to write, and suddenly it seems like this incredibly sort of luxurious thing to get back to, rather than something that, you know, is this real pressure. I don't know.
Thank you very much for your observations in a wonderful world of literature. But could Emily and Caroline comment about the books that may not have, obviously not successful, but the positive qualities that they still miss the mark?
Oh, gosh. The positive qualities, but they still miss the mark.
I think that falls into the category of we can't discuss what goes on in the room stays in the room, doesn't it?
Well, it's all about the bar again. You know, the bar was set very high this year. The standard was extraordinarily high. And this is a very human, very subjective process. And that's really, I really want to emphasise that there are a lot of things that happen at Booktopia, for example, that are done by an algorithm. An algorithm can't judge a literary prize, and judging a literary prize is a human experience, and so there will always be room for a flawed judgment, or a judgment that certainly you know, is open to question and that people will disagree with. And that's part of having a vigorous literary culture, is that we can have very vehement, heated, passionate conversations, that we can care about whether a book gets onto a long list or a short list. And I love the fact that these prizes do champion books that we might otherwise have overlooked, as much as validating, you know, the kind of elders of our literary culture. So really, that's the most I can say. Melissa, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
You've got to look for a strong voice. You've got to look for originality. You've got to look for that voice to be consistently maintained throughout a narrative or through a collection. And, you know, different judges will lean towards things like the contemporary, or, you know, everyone has their own personal favourites, their own personal quirks, but really what happens in the room stays in the room.
It's reminding me of jury duty. I keep thinking of jury duty.
Jury duty's a lot easier. I've done jury duty. Much easier.
I don't know, because I've never done jury duty, but so, yes, another question.
Thanks. This is a question for both of you. Can you say something about when you, or how you reached a point of feeling satisfied that your story was complete for you, and that you could let go of it into a published product?
Oh, well, for me, I think I probably would never have got to that point. And it's, for me, I think it's about having faith in your editor, and kind of letting them tell you when to stop. And I think that's the beauty of kind of working with someone else in, you know, as a writer. Once you, I mean, obviously, you have to get to a certain point before you're willing to kind of show your work to an editor. But once, you know, I just could have like tweaked for a million years and never kind of let go. I think it's really hard, and I think you have to kind of hand that over to someone else to say, it's done, stop.
No, it's a little bit different for me. I think I feel it quite instinctively. I think I can't write music or play music, but
Bring your mic in.
I can't play music. There you go. I can't write music or play music, but I suspect, I just have this strong feeling that there is a parallel me, that writing for me might be like composing music. So in the same way that a musician might feel the end of the way the music comes together, I can't sing or anything, but, you know, dunk da dunk da dunk, It's the end. It just instinctive.
It falls.
It falls. And I remember writing the very last sentence, and I've discovered, having had children, that I write quite well, even if it's mad and quick and scribbled across a page so it looks more like a rough note that you'd go home, that you'd throw away. It might actually be a really special sentence. I remember writing the last sentence in the middle of teaching a workshop while my students were also writing, and I scrambled it across the page. I knew where crying was made. That was and boom, so it remained. But it sort of, I don't know if that answers. It's kind of rough, instinctive, like sculpturing something. There it is, boom, like that.
Yeah.
Boom. Boom is the operative word, obviously.
So, it's not over to the editor by any means.
Interesting.
It's not.
I think for me, when I finish a novel, I definitely know where the end point of the novel is, and you get the boom or the thunk. And that's a very satisfying thunk, isn't it?
Thunk is better than boom. That's what I meant. Yeah.
But at the same time, Emily's right, and I forget who said no work of art is ever finished, only abandoned.
Yeah.
And Mullumbimby was finished 5 or 6 times, but no. And when I took it to my editor, who I gave myself over to this editor because someone I respect told me to trust her, and that's Uncle Bruce Pascoe. And I said, okay, I've got to take 5 years of work and give it to this woman and believe what she says and go with what she says. She said, cut 17,000 words, and I did. And you just have to decide, I think. It's like marriage, you find the right person, bang, you're in. You can't waver.
Please join me in thanking Melissa, Sofie and Emily.